Hello everybody, this is a series where I talk about fish from all over the world, mostly focusing on North America. And I thought I'd start my first video with one of my favorite groups of fish. These are the panfish in family Centrarchidae. So we're not going to cover all of Centrarchidae. That includes sunfishes like bluegills, pumpkin seeds, red ear sunfish. Also basses like the largemouth bass and the smallmouth bass. But this is kind of the lesser known sunfishes, you could say. I'm going to call them the panfish to kind of just show that they're different than the actual sunfish. But this is a single lineage that shares a common ancestor. There's 12 species in this group, and they're distributed across the whole country. So there's species in California, and then there's species all the way up the East Coast. So we're going to kind of start from the beginning of their evolution. This group kind of emerged about 35 million years ago, maybe a little before, maybe a little after. And this coincides with the Eocene-Oligocene transition. So there was a mass extinction about 35 million years ago that happened when Antarctica first glaciated. So kind of funny to think that that affected fish in North America, but it cooled off the planet so much very rapidly that it killed off a lot of fish species, and it allowed the fish species that we kind of know today to really begin radiating out. So that was a pretty important event, and this is one of those groups of fish that actually benefited from that kind of opening of new ecological roles. And the most, I say basal, and that means it's near the base of the tree, is the mud sunfish. So that pretty much means that it was the first to branch off of the family tree from these other species. And the mud sunfish is still around today, and it probably looks pretty much like what an ancestor to Centrarchidae might have looked like. So we don't know that for sure because it has been evolving independently, but given its similarity to some other species, which we'll talk about later, this might be a pretty good proxy for what the ancestor of this group may have looked like. So the mud sunfish still lives in the coastal plain, so that's the kind of swampier, flatter coastal areas of the Gulf and up the Atlantic coast all the way to New Jersey. So these species really like sandy, swampy streams, and they're really not too hard to find if you look in the right place. I'm in Alabama right now, and there's mud sunfish in like 2 streams in Alabama. Not really clear how they got there, but most of them start east of us in Georgia and Florida, and then move up. But this is a really cool species. It's kind of a generalist. You can see it's got a very rounded tail. That's not really typical of fishes in this group. A rounded tail usually means kind of more sluggish swimmer, more focused on maneuverability than speed. So these guys are probably living in tight quarters, dense habitats with lots of vegetation. Could be sticks that they're trying to maneuver around. Allows them to swim backwards a little bit even. So that is the mud sunfish, and we're going to move on to some close relatives of the mud sunfish. This group is called Enneacanthus. Oh, I should have said the mud sunfish is in genus Acantharchus, and that it's the only species in its genus. And then the next genus in this group is Enneacanthus, which has 3 species. So 2 of these are pretty widespread, the Bluespotted Sunfish and the Banded Sunfish. These are sister species, meaning they're very closely related to one another. And they share a lot of habitat too. They're both pretty much distributed from Florida up the Atlantic coast. Very similar range to the mud sunfish. Very similar habitat and similar lifestyle as well. And then you have the Blackbanded Sunfish, which is not quite as common. It's kind of hard to find these in certain places. Most of them are around Virginia and North Carolina, but they have a couple other states that they live in too. But this is definitely the outlier in the Enneacanthus group. It's definitely the least common, and also the most interesting. It's got that interesting orange spine down here and some really dark black stripes. But these fishes are really beautiful, and they're kind of becoming popular in the aquarium trade. Just because they're pretty small compared to some of these other species. They only get to be a couple inches in length, maybe something like that. And they're beautiful colors, as maybe you can see here off of my prints, but really, really interesting group. And then kind of in the same vein of, swampy coastal fishes, we have the Flier. And the Flier's a little bigger. These fish can get about this big, but they're still fairly small. Very deep-bodied. These fish are usually living in larger wetlands than these other species we talked about. Flyers are really known to live in oxbow lakes. So when a river meanders, it creates these deep bends, and eventually it'll bypass its own bend and cut that off, and it forms a a lake that is shaped kind of like, you know, an oxbow. That's where the name comes from. But flyers are pretty well known for living in those sorts of habitats, cypress swamps, kind of any large, sluggish river channel you can find flyers in. Some people will fish for these in certain parts of their range. They're mostly around the Mississippi, the lower Mississippi River, some of its major tributaries, also over to Mobile, the Mobile Basin in Alabama, and a couple other places too. And the flier is the only species in its genus, so it's in genus Centrarchus. So it's pretty closely related to Enneacanthus, but it's actually more closely related to this next group, the Crappies. So these are definitely the best known fishes out of this group, the most widespread. They're also the biggest. So crappies can be a couple pounds, the big ones, 2, 3, 4 pounds for the real monsters. But they pretty commonly approach a foot in length, and the white crappies even a little bigger. They can get up to 14, 15, 16 inches pretty commonly. Black crappie can get pretty big too, but the white crappie is the bigger of the two species. These are the only two species in Pomoxis, and probably the reason they're so well known is because they're so popular in angling. They're big enough that it's not very hard to catch them. I go fishing for black crappies all the time. I grew up on a lake in Minnesota, and I really enjoy crappie fishing. I'm not so familiar with white crappies. They tend to prefer kind of muddier, larger bodies of water. You can find them in muddy reservoirs and lakes, large rivers, whereas black crappie mostly like clear water, a lot of vegetation. That's kind of what separates the two species. They mostly share a range. And this is the first group that we've talked about today that really gets up into the Midwest and the Northeast. And even the West. These things are not native to the Western United States, but they've been introduced all over because they really do well in man-made reservoirs and ponds. So that's another reason for their popularity. Is you can really kind of dig a hole in the ground, fill it with water, and crappies will probably do pretty well in there. They eat a lot of fish compared to other fishes in this group. Most of the species we talked about already are focused on eating insects, other invertebrates. Crappies are really, we call them piscivores. That's a name for a fish that eats other fish, a piscivore. They're really eating a lot of minnows and other juvenile fishes once they get to be, large enough to do that. So yeah, these are fun fish and definitely the mascots of this group. And there's a pretty good chance that you have crappie near you. So if you're looking to get see some of these fish out in the wild, crappie's probably a good bet. There's a good chance that you have a crappie pond near you. And we'll move on to our most diverse group of panfish. This is the rock bass group. It's genus Ambloplites. And there are 4 species in Ambloplites. So the one y'all probably know is the rock bass. And this species is distributed throughout the Mississippi River Basin and a couple other places as well, especially the Great Lakes. So rock bass are pretty easy to find. They live in rivers, streams. They really do like lakes a lot. I catch a lot of rock bass back home while fishing for largemouth. They're kind of an intermediate species between sunfish, bass, and crappie. They're a generalist diet. They eat a lot of fish, but they also eat a lot of invertebrates, so they're eating a lot of insects even as adults. So you can really catch rock bass kind of no matter what you're doing. There's a good chance that a rock bass is going to hit your bait, and they get pretty good sizes too, maybe something like this. There's definitely rock bass that approach a pound, 2 pounds. So this can be a really fun angling fish too, and they tend to be more common than crappies. So it could be a good option if you're trying to do a fish fry. But not a lot of people know that there are other species of rock bass that are closely related, but have some distinct differences. We'll start with the Roanoke bass. This one's the most similar to the rock bass, and it's also the most the first to branch off from the rock bass group. This species ended up on the east side of the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia and North Carolina, and it's got a very small range, and it's one of the rarest fish in this group. But it's pretty interesting just to have something that's a little bit different. I don't think I could tell you the difference between a rock bass and a Roanoke bass if I had them both in my hands, but there is a genetic difference, and I'm sure there's a way to tell them apart. Somebody can correct me on that, but that's the only one of the rock bass that I haven't seen personally. These other 2 species I've been lucky enough to handle on my own. So we've got the shadow bass. These ones are really cool. They've got a little more of that dark mottling that rock bass tend to have it too, but the shadow bass really always have these dark blotches on the sides of the body. The shadow bass lives on the Gulf Coast, so kind of from Florida over to Mississippi. I see a lot of them here in Alabama where I am now. They really like kind of smaller, swampier streams than a rock bass would prefer. And that's kind of makes sense given their range. A lot of the streams on the Gulf Coast are pretty sluggish, running through flat, sandy areas. And then the last bass is the Ozark bass, and this is, true to its name, found in northwest Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma. And these ones are unique because they don't have as much of the blotches, but they have these dark spots that are kind of scattered over them. And they're a lot sparser. You can see the spotting on these is pretty dense. With the Ozark bass, you kind of have these loose spots. I saw these in Arkansas as well, and these ones right away, you can tell that they're different than a rock bass. I think they're probably the most unique out of the group. But again, there's a good chance you have one of these near you if you live in the U.S. Rock bass have been introduced out west, and these other three species have pretty sizable ranges too. So pretty much wherever you are, there's a pretty good chance that you could go out and look for one of these as well. And they're pretty easy to catch on hook and line. And now we're going to talk about my favorite fish in this group, and one that I've never seen. This is the Sacramento Perch. So the Sacramento Perch, it's also the rarest fish in this panfish group. There's only a few known populations left, and they're completely extirpated from their native range. So they used to live in ponds and rivers and streams throughout the Sacramento Valley in California. So really utilizing the San Joaquin Delta. They're somewhat tolerant to salt in their water. They're also tolerant to a whole lot of other pollutants because life in California as a fish, a freshwater fish, is really, really tough these days, and has been for a couple million years. California got really dry as the mountains rose, and a lot of the water disappeared or got concentrated into small streams. But the Sacramento Perch found a way to survive for millions of years isolated from these other fish. So we're going to talk a little bit about their evolution, just because it's so interesting. So the Sacramento Perch is one of the only fish that cross the Rocky Mountains. It's one of the only fish that we know of. So its closest relatives are the rock bass, as you can maybe kind of tell. They've got a similar pattern, similar body shape. But they've been evolving independently from the rock bass for probably about 15 million years. So they've really been doing their own thing for a long time. And this genus, Archoplites, probably originated in the Mississippi River Basin or somewhere nearby, just like the rock bass. But instead of staying there, it moved north and west. So there used to be this river system in North America called the Bell River system. The Bell River still exists up in Canada, but formerly the Colorado River, the Missouri River, Yellowstone River, a lot of those western rivers drained northward to Canada into the Bell River. And this was such a large river system, it drained the majority of the North American continent, and the size and scale of it was greater than the modern Amazon River. So this was a massive river system that existed all the way up until about 3 million years ago. The glaciers started coming down and redirecting rivers. So as the Ice Age came in, these glaciers were kind of scouring the earth, changing the course of water, and it really shrunk the Bell River system over time. The rivers ended up kind of rerouting south, a lot of them to the Mississippi Basin, and a few to the Colorado River Basin. But before that happened, the Sacramento Perch did some river hopping. It kind of moved through river systems up through that old Bell River system, over to the Rockies, and kind of ended up near the headwaters of that system on the edge of the Rockies. And somewhere around Idaho, this species managed to cross over. So most likely there was a fault that happened that shifted the earth and connected rivers across the Continental Divide, carrying the Sacramento Perch west of the Continental Divide down to the Pacific coast. So pretty extraordinary. There's really no other fish that we know of, as far as I'm aware, that has followed this same dispersal and lived to tell about it. So a lot of species that did found themselves in these really kind of dry desert conditions of California and even Oregon. But the Sacramento Perch was able to survive. We know that this is how they got there because there's fossils of them in Idaho, in the Clarkia fossil beds, Archoplites fossils. So, and that's also how we know how long they've been evolving separately from rock bass, because those fossils are from over 10 million years ago. So at any rate, this thing made its way down the Pacific coast, found the San Joaquin Delta in California, and made that home, and it's been there ever since until late 1800s, early 1900s. American settlers came in. Overfishing was tough on this fish, and changes in water infrastructure really were hard on it as well, and it lost a lot of habitat. But the good news was people were stocking them in various farm ponds and other areas around California and really throughout the American West. And viable populations have survived. So even though it's effectively extinct in its native range, the species is still alive in other places. And there's work being done in California and some other places to conserve this species. And it's really an interesting fish. It gets to a pretty good size. I've seen pictures of them, over a foot in length, and they get pretty sizable, and I'm assuming they put up a pretty good fight on hook and line. So there's an angling motivation to keep this species around. So for folks out west, especially those in California, maybe check out the Sacramento Perch, see if you can catch one. If you do, let me know. It's one of my favorite species, at least in concept, and I'd love to get out west and see one someday. But yeah, this is the only native sunfish species that lives in the American West. So get out there and check out the Sacramento Perch. It's a cool species. That's kind of the rundown of all the species we have in this group. It's a really interesting family, and chances are there's one near you. So at least if you're living in the U.S.